An airport K-9 lunged at a family member while the baby's Rattle stayed clutched in his hand, but the family's quick action turned the moment into a shocking scene everyone remembered. An airport K-9 attacked my baby's uncle, thinking he could intimidate him. He didn't realize the infant's Rattle was still clutched in his hand, a silent symbol of the father's unstoppable resolve. The moment the dog lunged, the entire terminal's tension exploded. Subscribe. If you believe arrogance collapses the instant real strength intervenes. The dog lunged before anyone understood what was happening. One moment, the polished floor of Valor International Airport shimmered beneath the bright terminal lights. The next, the black K-9 was already airborne, its growl slicing through the murmuring crowd like a blade. Zaven Merrick barely had time to twist his body, instinct taking over as he shielded the infant strapped to his chest. His shoes scraped against the floor as he staggered back, the sudden force sending a jolt through his spine. Kieran's tiny cry pierced the air, high and terrified, just as the animal's teeth sank deep into Zaven's side. The shock of pain hit him like fire. His hand immediately shot around the baby, tightening his hold as he gasped, shoulders tense, breath locked in his throat. Around him, people froze, mouths open, luggage slipping from hands, footsteps halting mid-motion. The airport acoustics magnified every sound. The dog's snarl, Kieran's scream, Zaven's ragged breath. The bright red Rattle slipped from Kieran's grip, falling in a delicate arc before hitting the floor. It spun wildly, the crescent shape catching the light as if refusing to settle. The moment felt suspended, stretched into something unreal. "Hold him still," the handler barked, Officer Branteller, tall and rigid, his jaw clenched as though this brutal command were routine. His gloved hand tightened around the leash, not to pull the dog off, but to anchor it, allowing it to grind its teeth deeper into Zaven's flesh. "What are you doing?" Zaven managed through gritted teeth, his voice strained but protective. He shifted his torso, curling around Kieran like a living shield, even as blood seeped down his shirt, warm and fast. There's a baby with me." His words echoed, but no one moved. The towering officer at the checkpoint, the one who had ordered the sweep, stepped forward with mechanical calm. His buzz cut cast a sharp silhouette under the overhead lights, and his narrowed eyes revealed no alarm, no reconsideration. "Protocol sweep," he said flatly, as if reciting a rule he didn't need to justify. Even with the chaos erupting, his tone remained cool. "Even with the baby?" Zaven gasped again, disbelief cracking through his voice. "Just follow orders," the officer replied, folding his arms as though the scene before him required observation, not intervention. Passengers near the checkpoint recoiled. A father pulled his teenage son behind him. A young man dropped his boarding pass. A businessman whispered, "This can't be happening," but he didn't step forward. Fear held them in place. Fear of rules, fear of uniforms, fear of misunderstanding a situation they didn't fully grasp. Dramatic irony hung heavy. Zaven didn't know yet that eyes had been watching him since he entered the airport, that whispers into radios weren't just routine checks, and that the K-9 team had shifted positions the moment he approached Gate 19. But even without that knowledge, he felt the wrongness like a weight pressing against his ribs. Kieran wailed again, his small fists trembling against Zaven's chest. His Rattle continued spinning on the floor, tapping faintly as it slowed. Zaven forced himself to stay upright, every muscle shaking as the dog's bite tightened. He tried to adjust his footing, but the pain shot down his hip, making his knees buckle. "Get him off," a man in the crowd shouted, but the handler didn't flinch. Officer Branteller remained expressionless, his grip on the leash steady, calculated. His eyes flicked only once toward the infant, before returning to the attack. That single glance told Zaven everything. Bran had noticed the child, and he still wasn't stopping. A cold dread settled in Zaven's stomach. He lifted one trembling hand, palm outward, trying not to jostle Chiron. "Please," he said, his voice cracking from the pain and fear. "He's just a baby." Still nothing. The towering officer simply nodded at Bran, as though approving the continuation. Blood dripped onto the polished floor, spreading in slow, dark drops. The airport's sterile scent mixed with the metallic tang rising from Zaven's side. His vision blurred for a moment, but he shook it off, pulling himself back into sharp awareness. He couldn't pass out. Not while Kieran was pressed against him, trusting him. The rattle slowed its spin, wobbling, reflecting silhouettes of stunned bystanders. A young security trainee near the checkpoint hesitated, stepping forward with uncertainty. "Sir." "He's carrying a child," he said quietly to Bran, his voice trembling with the weight of a moral line he didn't know how to enforce. "Shouldn't we?" Bran cut him off with a glare, voice cold. "He matches the criteria. Proceed." "Criteria?" Zaven's heartbeat stuttered. What criteria could justify this? The dog jerked violently, dragging him down another inch. His breath hitched, the agony nearly buckling him again. But he refused to loosen his grip on Kieran. He angled his body, arms locked tight around the baby, shielding him even as warm blood seeped between his fingers. The trainee froze, retreating with fear clouding his face. No one dared to challenge the officers further. The rattle made one final turn on the floor and stilled. The noise of the terminal, rolling suitcases, boarding calls, casual chatter, had evaporated. All that remained was the raw, urgent rhythm of a man fighting to protect a child who could not protect himself. Someone finally shouted, "Stop the dog! He's bleeding!" But Bran didn't move. The towering officer didn't move. And the crowd remained caught between horror and helplessness, held hostage by rules they didn't understand. Zaven grit his teeth, forcing his shaking hand to reach downward, not to push the dog away but to brace himself so he wouldn't collapse onto Kieran. His chest heaved as he whispered to the baby, voice trembling, "I've got you. I've got you. Stay with me." Kieran's cries trembled into soft, frightened hiccups. The silence felt like it was crushing the terminal. Then the spinning red toy caught the light one last time, a small reminder of innocence amid chaos, a reminder of who Zaven was truly fighting for. And when the medic finally knelt beside him, horrified eyes widening at the sight of the wound, he whispered the words that etched themselves into every witness's memory. The infant's rattle was still in his hand. The dog was already on him. No warning, no bark, just the blur of black fur and teeth as the K-9 launched forward, jaws snapping open midair before slamming into Zaven Merrick's right side. The pain hit a split second later, raw and deep, like fire stitching itself beneath his skin. His knees buckled. His back slammed into the cold linoleum floor of the terminal near Gate 19. But even as the shock coursed through him, his instincts didn't hesitate. His arm curled inward, shielding the infant strapped to his chest. Kieran wailed, a piercing cry that fractured the hush that had fallen over the nearby passengers. The red rattle, shaped like a crescent moon, flew from the baby's hand and skittered across the floor, spinning wildly before it came to rest just inches from Zaven's outstretched foot. Screams erupted. A woman clutched her toddler and backed away. A man dropped his boarding pass. One older passenger shouted for help, voice cracking, but no one moved fast enough. Zaven gasped, pain scorching every nerve as the dog's teeth dug deeper into his torso, puncturing through his coat and shirt. Blood welled quickly, saturating the fabric in a dark, sticky bloom. "Hold the leash," someone cried, but Officer Bran Teller didn't flinch. His expression remained stone-cold as he stood over Zaven, one boot braced against the floor, knuckles tight around the leash. The dog snarled low and guttural, its head jerking with each shake as if trying to tear something free from the man's side. "I have a medical file," Zaven choked out, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "He's an infant patient. This is a medical trip." The baby's cries were now deafening, each scream a note of terror that cut through the sterile air of the terminal. Still, no help came. Bran Teller pressed a button on the side of his radio and muttered something low into it. his tone disturbingly calm, like he was reporting a routine luggage check, not a canine attack on a man carrying a baby. To Zaven's right, a young officer hesitated near the perimeter of the chaos, his eyes locked on the scene. He took a step forward, eyes flickering from the baby to the dog, then to Bran. "That's a baby," the officer said, voice unsteady. "Sir, he's got a baby with him. This doesn't feel right." Bran didn't even look at him. "Protocol sweep. Can't override it. This area's under tactical watch." The words landed like a hammer. Tactical watch? That was a designation Zaven knew all too well from his trauma response work. It was usually triggered for high-risk threats, suspected carriers of hazardous items, flagged individuals, security anomalies. Not men carrying infants with rattle toys, not medical guardians on pediatric consultations. He gritted his teeth against a new wave of pain and tightened his arm protectively over Chiron, whose body shook with each sob. His own blood now soaked the baby's blanket, and the coppery scent mingled with antiseptic air and cheap coffee from a nearby kiosk. Each second stretched like molasses. No alarms, no response team. Just a hallway full of witnesses too stunned or too uncertain to act. "Get him off me," Zaven growled, forcing his other arm underneath him to try to sit up. "You're hurting the wrong person." But Bran held firm. His jaw was locked, gaze cold and unflinching. Zaven could see it now, not the confusion of a misread command, but the conviction of someone who believed this was planned, deliberate. Footsteps approached. Finally, a pair of medics pushed through the crowd with urgency, their gurney wheels squeaking on the tiles. One of them, a lanky man with a trimmed beard and blue gloves, knelt quickly beside Zaven. "What happened?" he asked, scanning the scene. "Dog attack," the younger officer answered, still hovering on the edge. "But he was carrying a baby. I don't get it." "Don't let them touch the baby," Zaven whispered hoarsely, barely audible. He turned his head, making eye contact with the medic even as pain rippled through his abdomen. "Not until I know who ordered this." The medic froze, glancing at his partner. Then he nodded slowly, eyes scanning Zaven's arm, still cradling Kieran protectively. The infant's cries had become ragged hiccups now, his face blotchy and tear-streaked, fingers curling into the front of Zaven's jacket. Then, something strange caught Bran's attention. The rattle. It was still in Zaven's left hand, trembling but not dropped. Blood coated the plastic toy, but it remained firm in his grip. His fingers clamped around it in unconscious defiance. Despite the agony, despite the impact, despite the fall, he hadn't let go. The medic looked down, then back up at Zaven, his voice barely above a whisper. "He never let go," the medic whispered. The pain was sharper than Zaven had expected. It pulsed just under his ribs where the dog had bitten him, and each tug of the needle was like a reminder that something more than flesh had been torn. Inside the terminal's emergency wing, the lights were bright and sterile, but nothing felt clean. A monitor beeped steadily nearby, though its rhythm didn't match the racing thoughts in Zaven's head. His shirt, now cut away and discarded, lay in a red-spotted heap in the corner. Kieran's blanket, thin and airport-issued, had been draped around the infant's tiny body as he lay in a plastic crib only feet away, staring up with wide, searching eyes that mirrored his father's. Zaven clenched his jaw as the medic inserted another stitch. "Try to breathe normally," the man said softly, but his voice was distant, robotic. None of them had said much. That silence was its own alarm. He glanced sideways. 2 male nurses hovered by a terminal, whispering just out of earshot. A third, older, lean, with gray at the temples and a faded staff badge clipped to his collar, stood watching. His name tag read Drellin. He wasn't tending to anyone, just observing. Zaven caught his eye. Drellin gave the briefest nod and moved toward him. "You don't know, do you?" the nurse said under his breath, his eyes flicking toward the others. "The dog wasn't supposed to be deployed." Zaven blinked. Pain and adrenaline blurred his focus. "What do you mean?" Drellin reached into his chest pocket, glanced once more at the closed curtain, and slipped a folded paper into Zaven's hand. Zaven opened it slowly with his unbandaged fingers. It was a field order, standard, printed, with timestamps and terminal designations. A K-9 narcotics sweep. Location: Terminal 4. B. Nowhere near Gate 19. But across the bottom margin, a handwritten addition in dark ink stood out. Override for Gate 19. Merrick flagged for tactical check. Zaven's mouth went dry. He read it again. His name. Not a boarding group. Not a profile match. His name. Someone changed this, he muttered. Drellin nodded once, then stepped back like he hadn't spoken. Zaven stared at the page. His pulse thudded in his ears louder than the medical beeps. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or a random error in the system. It was targeted, purposeful. His clearance had been altered with intent. But who would do that? And why? He wasn't on any agency watch list. He was a trauma instructor, a registered pediatric guardian with complete documentation. The baby he held wasn't even his biologically. Kieran was 10 months old, recovering from seizures and traveling under medical pre-authorization. There were no flags. There were no threats. Yet someone had wanted them intercepted. The curtain rustled. Zaven quickly tucked the order under his hospital blanket. The air shifted as a tall man stepped in. Black vest, silver pins glinting against the light, clipboard tucked under one arm. He carried himself like someone used to rooms going silent when he entered them. His voice was controlled, too crisp to be kind. "Mr. Merrick?" Zaven didn't reply at first. He studied the man's face. Trim beard, steel blue eyes. His demeanor wasn't confrontational, but there was tension in his shoulders like someone walking a legal tightrope. "I'm Captain Ren Davor from Airport Ethics Oversight," the man continued. "We need to talk." Zaven inhaled through his nose, slowly. His side flared with pain, but not enough to drown the rising suspicion in his chest. Then, close the curtain. Ren blinked, just for a moment. Zaven straightened as much as the pain allowed, voice quieter but colder. "Because I'm not leaving until someone tells me who set that dog on me, while I was holding a baby." The folder hit the table with a heavy thud. Captain Ren Davor watched Zaven Merrick carefully, his fingers lingering on the edge of the sealed document as if unsure whether to let go. They sat across from each other in a quiet operations room just beyond the airport's restricted security hall, its fluorescent lights humming low and cold. Zaven, nursing the bandaged wound along his side, leaned forward in his chair without breaking eye contact. The sting of disinfectant still clung to his uniform shirt, now half-buttoned and darkened at the seams with dried blood. Kieran was resting elsewhere, finally calm, but the storm inside Zaven had just begun. "You knew my name," Zaven said slowly, voice tight with suspicion. "Before I said a word. Why?" Ren hesitated, his brow furrowed, the lines at his temples deepening. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he replied, "Because your name came up. In this." He pushed the file forward. Zaven opened it. At first his eyes skimmed quickly, searching for context. But as the words registered, his breath caught. The front page bore the heading, Intervention Advisory, L-Class, Medical Equipment Transport Review Notice. His name was typed in bold beneath it, with accompanying information about his travel itinerary, medical designation, and accompanying minor. The accusation was vague but unmistakable. "Medical transport inconsistent with stated purpose," Zaven read aloud, stunned. "You think I'm smuggling something?" He flipped the page. That's when he saw it. There, printed in clinical black and white, was a close-up photo of Kieran's Rattle, the same Rattle the infant had gripped while screaming during the dog attack. But this time, the image was surrounded by strange annotations, red circles, technical arrows, and flagged phrases like hollow chamber suspected and potential concealment vector. Zaven's jaw clenched. That Rattle plays lullabies. It's a sleep aid. Are you seriously telling me someone flagged it as a threat? Wren shifted again, visibly uncomfortable. There's been a trend, he said. Certain pediatric accessories being used to bypass detection. Hollow items, baby shoes with false soles, pacifiers with... It's a child's toy, Zaven cut in, rising halfway from his seat. Pain radiated up his torso, but he didn't care. You let a dog rip into a man carrying a 10-month-old because of a bedtime toy? I didn't authorize the override, Wren said quickly, standing too. This isn't what it looks like. Zaven stared him down, heat rising behind his eyes. Isn't it? Because you're sitting here with a file that reads like I'm trafficking contraband. Through a rattle. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. The sound of distant intercom announcements bled through the walls. Boarding calls. Gate changes. The world continued as if nothing had happened. But for Zaven, everything had. He stepped closer to the table and tapped the annotated Rattle photo with a trembling finger. You've been manipulated, he said quietly, voice laced with steel. You just don't know by who. Wren's hand moved toward his belt radio instinctively, as though ready to call someone, anyone. But then he stopped. His lips parted, then shut again. Zaven studied him. There was no defiance in the man's posture, only fear. And not of Zaven. Fear of something deeper, higher. Zaven took a breath and straightened his shoulders. I need access to your clearance logs. Full digital trail, timestamps, override authorizations. If this didn't come from you, then it came from someone who still has access, and who knew I'd be at Gate 19, carrying that toy. Wren didn't answer. He looked down at the folder like it might burn him. Because that override signature, Zaven said, narrowing his gaze, isn't yours. Wren's silence said everything, and Zaven's voice, now cold as steel, finished the moment with finality. Someone wanted this attack to happen, and I'm going to find out who. Zaven Merrick limped down the corridor of Valor Airport's administrative wing, his wound freshly bandaged beneath his shirt, every step reminding him why he couldn't afford to let this go. The hall was sterile and cold, fluorescent lights humming faintly above, walls lined with framed safety protocol posters that now felt like cruel irony. Beside him walked Captain Wren DeVore, posture rigid, expression unreadable. Neither man spoke. Behind them, footsteps echoed faintly. Officer Gerald Knorr, the one man from the scene who hadn't stood still when everything was falling apart. They entered a small operations room tucked behind an access-restricted glass door. The lights flickered on with a soft buzz, revealing a console desk, 2 monitors, and a data port embedded in the wall. Jarrell stepped forward without a word and handed Zaven a flash drive. His eyes were tired, but clear. Security cam footage. I pulled it before Bran could overwrite it, he said. Zaven gave a silent nod, inserted the drive, and hit play. The footage loaded quickly, black and white video time-stamped just minutes before the attack. The camera overlooked the checkpoint leading into Gate 19. On screen, Zaven and Kieran approached slowly, the infant snug against his chest. 30 feet away, the K-9 team stood idle. The dog was still. Its handler, Bran Teller, was glancing at his phone. Then it happened. Bran's eyes widened slightly. He lowered the phone and gave the leash a firm jerk, pointing with his free hand directly at Zaven and Kieran. The dog tensed, ears raised, not reacting to any scent but to the command. It lunged toward the checkpoint. Jarrell leaned in, voice low. He wasn't reacting to a scent, he whispered. He was following an order. Zaven's jaw tightened. He scrubbed backward through the footage and paused at a close-up frame where Bran's phone screen was still faintly visible. With a few keystrokes, he zoomed in. A message. Blurred but legible. Target confirmed. Move now. Rattle is signal. Captain Wren leaned forward. What signal? he asked, his voice a strained attempt to remain neutral, but Zaven could already hear the shift. He wasn't just a witness now. He was a participant. Zaven didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. Navigating through encrypted folders, he opened a secure document and tapped it open. Kieran's medical tag profile. The screen displayed a diagram of the wearable tag sewn into Kieran's onesie, a low-frequency emitter used in pediatric hospitals, synced to monitor respiration and oxygen levels in transit. His medical tag uses a low-hertz chip, Zaven said, holding the phone up. Totally harmless, but it mimics a certain encrypted pattern if scanned by the wrong reader. Wren frowned. You think that's what triggered the dog? No, Zaven replied, slowly turning the screen. I think someone spoofed that signal, hijacked it, deliberately. He turned back to the footage and hit play again, voice tightening. Bran didn't smell anything. He didn't see a threat. He got a message. Then he pointed, and the dog obeyed, because someone rewired the rules mid-air. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Jarrell stepped back and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. If that message was automated, or worse, coordinated, this isn't just a breach, it's a blueprint. Wren nodded grimly. Which means someone accessed your nephew's medical data without clearance. Zaven exhaled through his nose, the pulse at his temple throbbing. They didn't just access it, they weaponized it. Which means we're not dealing with a misread. We're dealing with sabotage. He paused, letting the words settle like dust in the air. On the screen, the dog lunged again in looped silence. And the rattle? Wren asked, voice low, uncertain. Zaven turned to face him fully, meeting his gaze with steel in his eyes. Still in my hand when the dog bit me. News of the K9 attack tore through media outlets like a lightning bolt across a dry sky. Broadcasts looped footage of Zaven Merrick slumped on the airport floor, blood soaking his shirt as he curled protectively around the crying infant. Anchors repeated the same phrase with growing outrage. The infant's rattle was still in his hand. But beyond the headlines and the outrage, something colder stirred beneath the surface, something Zaven intended to unearth. By mid-morning the next day, Zaven was in a quiet, concrete-walled lab deep beneath a nondescript building on the west end of Calvis City. The lab belonged to Dr. Laren Vess, a former intelligence codebreaker who now specialized in private encryption analysis. The man was lean, gray at the temples, and always half a breath away from sounding like he knew more than he could ever say. The rattle lay on the examination platform under a translucent hood. Inside, its crescent moon shell was split cleanly in half, exposing the minute circuitry nestled beneath what once looked like nothing more than a music box speaker. Wires, no thicker than a strand of hair, curved around a soft green beacon, a pediatric audio emitter designed to sync with certain neurology monitors. It's clean tech, Zaven said, watching intently as Laron adjusted the microscanner. Kieran's doctor gave it to me, calibrated for sleep rhythm modulation. There's no way this thing triggered an attack. Laron said nothing for a while. He ran his fingers along the scanner's edge, tapping keys softly. Blue light pulsed over the toy's surface. A thin beep echoed. Then another. Then static. Laron froze. That shouldn't be there. Zaven leaned in. What is it? Layered modulation, Laron murmured, pulling up a waveform on the nearby screen. Here's the standard lullaby frequency, harmless, low band, within pediatric protocol. He highlighted a smooth curve of gentle tones. But embedded beneath it, see this irregular spike? That's a synthetic insert, high-res, compressed. It wasn't part of the original design. Zaven's eyes narrowed. Someone tampered with it? Laron didn't answer immediately. He activated a secondary scan, this time applying a simulated sweep using canine sensory models. The screen lit red. The rattle had responded like a distress beacon. This wasn't a misread, Laron finally said, his voice grim. Someone hijacked the Rattle's internal beacon and inserted a military-grade distress code. That dog didn't react to a threat. It reacted to a synthetic trigger. Zaven straightened as if every nerve in his back had tightened into steel. "You're telling me someone turned a child's toy into a remote attack vector?" "Yes," Laurent said without hesitation. "And it had to be done remotely. The Rattle's firmware is locked. This kind of injection could only occur through unauthorized signal access while in transit." The room seemed to shrink. Air felt thin. Zaven paced once, then stopped beside the viewing panel and stared out at the street below. The pedestrians looked small, normal, unaware. "Whoever did this," he said slowly, "had access to my flight itinerary, Chiron's medical specs, and the frequency settings of a pediatric comfort device." He turned to face Laurent again. "Why would they do that?" Laurent hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Because if you can prove a baby's toy is vulnerable, you can justify invasive countermeasures, new surveillance permissions, more funding, more control." Zaven's fists clenched at his sides. "So this wasn't just an attack. It was a test?" "A proof of concept," Laurent said. "You were a calculated choice, a civilian, no agency shield, traveling alone with a child. Your background makes you competent, but not powerful enough to be untouchable. They wanted a case that wouldn't trigger a diplomatic fallout, but that would send waves if it leaked." Zaven sat heavily in the chair, hands on his knees. His mind flashed through the last 2 days. The airport staff's hesitation. The officer who had whispered, "Tactical watch." The altered K-9 sweep orders. The anonymous field override. It all lined up. "They picked me," he said quietly, "because I'm visible, vulnerable, a man with a noble reason for travel, but no armor behind my name." Laurent folded his arms. "And because if something went wrong, they thought no one would look twice." Zaven laughed once, bitter and low. "They miscalculated." A moment passed in silence, filled only by the soft humming of the scanner. Then a small coo broke the tension. Kieran stirred in his car seat, shifting beneath his blanket. His tiny hand found the edge of a plush toy nearby, tugging it closer. Zaven turned to him, gaze softening. The infant was unharmed, smiling now, oblivious to the world's cruel calculations. Zaven rose slowly, walked to Kieran's side and gently adjusted the blanket. Then he looked back at the workbench where the Rattle lay open like a crime scene. "They wanted to see if the system would cover it up," he said, almost to himself. "They wanted to see if anyone would question it." He reached down and picked up the other half of the Rattle shell. The bite marks were still faintly visible. He closed his hand around it. "Then they'll learn," he said, voice steady now, resolute, alive with something deeper than outrage. "I'm not the type to stay silent." The hearing began with tension already hanging in the air, as if the walls themselves sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold. Zaven Merrick stood at the center of the long conference table, his posture rigid, his expression controlled but burning with purpose. He had barely spoken a greeting before the board members launched into concerns, and the moment he set the infant's Rattle onto the polished wood surface, every pair of eyes flicked to it, uneasy, unsure, unwilling to face what it symbolized. "This won't help anyone," one board member insisted immediately, his voice thin despite the authority he tried to project. He tapped a pen nervously against his folder, avoiding Zaven's gaze. "It'll panic families." Another leaned back in his chair, folding his arms with a stern frown. Even if the K-9 was triggered by an altered signal, the officer followed protocol, he said, as though the word protocol alone could wash away blood or dismiss fear. Zaven absorbed their words in silence at first, letting them speak, letting them expose their reluctance. Then he stepped forward, planting his palms firmly on the table. His voice, when it came, was steady and calm, precisely the kind of calm that makes people listen. "Protocol doesn't explain a forged override order," he said, scanning their faces one by one. Or encrypted tampering inside an infant's toy. Somebody shifted in his seat. Another swallowed hard. You don't get to call this a misstep when someone bled for it, Zavin added quietly, and the room fell still. Not silent, still. The kind of still where truth presses on people, forcing them to look at the cost of their own hesitation. He gestured toward the screen mounted on the wall. Ren Devore, standing a few steps behind him like a silent pillar of support, activated the footage. The room darkened slightly as the video played. Zavin at the checkpoint, Kieran strapped to his chest, the rattle clutched in his hand. Then the dog lunging. Too fast, too direct, followed by the chaos that had erupted around them. When the audio clip played, the intercepted message reading, "Move now." A rippling unease passed through the board. They had seen footage before. They had heard testimony before. But never like this. Never with a baby involved. Never with evidence this deliberate. Before anyone could speak, Ren quietly reached into his folder and pulled out a second document. He slid it across the table with slow precision, as if laying down a card that none of them wanted to see. "We found something else," he said softly. One of the board members lifted the document, his expression drained of color. "These are clearance override logs," he murmured. "The digital signature belongs to Varric Dorn?" A whisper of alarm scattered across the table. "Varric was suspended," said another board member, straightening abruptly. "Fired even, months ago. Unauthorized surveillance on families. His access should be gone." "How is he still in the system?" someone else whispered, voice cracking under the weight of the implication. "He wasn't," Ren replied, stepping forward. His jaw was tight, and his eyes carried the realization that this was larger than an officer's mistake or a malfunctioning device. Which means someone's reactivating old access points. A chill swept through the room. It wasn't just fear, it was the dawning understanding that a hidden hand was buried somewhere in their infrastructure, manipulating decisions, redirecting authority, rewriting what should have been secure. Zavin watched their reactions closely, reading each flicker of doubt, each tremor of unease, each silent admission that they had failed to protect the public because they had trusted a system built on unchecked authority. He breathed in slowly, then straightened. "I didn't come here to ask for justice," he said, his voice carrying through the room with quiet force. "I came to ensure no other child becomes a test case." He reached down, lifted the rattle, and placed it carefully onto the table. The faint marks on its bright surface, marks he knew too well, seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. "You'll need this as evidence," he added. The board chair looked pale. Truly pale. The kind of paleness that came from realizing a truth too heavy to ignore. "Mr. Merrick," he said slowly, "if you do that, everything goes public." Zavin didn't blink, didn't hesitate. He met the man's gaze with steady clarity, his voice quiet but unbreakable. "Exactly. That's the point." The K-9 handler smirked, confident the attack would go unchecked, unaware that every movement, every witness, and every second had already been calculated by a father who never misses a threat to his family. If you believe cruelty under authority always folds when preparation meets precision, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. The security alarm pierced the silence at 2:17 a.m. Zavin Merrick bolted upright, heart hammering as the alert lit up on his phone. He grabbed it off the nightstand. Apartment security system. Perimeter breach triggered. He moved fast, checking the front door, windows, even the hallway. But nothing was broken, nothing open. The locks were still intact. Everything looked normal. And yet, something wasn't. Kieran was still sleeping peacefully in the crib beside the couch, his little chest rising and falling beneath the soft blanket. The rattle, replaced weeks ago, rested beside his tiny hand. Zavin crouched slowly and scanned the room, his eyes catching the faintest irregularity. Kieran's diaper bag, always zipped, was ajar. Slightly, just slightly. But it hadn't been that way when he went to sleep. He was sure of it. He moved to it like a surgeon preparing for a risky incision. Controlled, deliberate. He peeled the top flap open and ran his fingers along the inner lining, pausing when he felt a stiffness that hadn't been there before. With tweezers from the emergency kit, he slid a tiny rectangular object out of a hidden seam. A transmitter. Paper-thin, matte black, and unmarked. It was no bigger than a penny, but the moment Zaven held it under the desk lamp, he knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't someone preparing to act. This was someone already watching. By morning, he had Ren Davor standing in the hallway, eyes wide with disbelief. Zaven held up the transmitter in a sealed bag. "They're watching us. Still." Ren didn't speak for several seconds. His gaze shifted from the bag to Chiron, who was now toddling clumsily along the couch edge, murmuring nonsense syllables with a half-chewed pacifier. "If this goes higher than Varric," Ren said finally, voice low, "we may be looking at a shadow unit using airline infrastructure as cover." Zaven nodded grimly. And what better cover than a K-9 division? Nobody questions a dog attack, until now. He didn't wait for a reply. Instead, he made a call to someone he hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. Bram Veller answered after 2 rings. The voice on the other end was gruff and alert, even at dawn. "Merrick, I need your eyes on something. K-9 trigger anomaly, and it's spreading." Bram was there within 4 hours. A retired field operations handler turned compliance advisor, Bram had once overseen internal corruption probes in hostile zones. Now, his gaze swept Zaven's apartment like a sniper scanning a rooftop. After reviewing the transmitter, the footage, and the override orders, Bram leaned back in the worn kitchen chair, folding his arms tightly. 3 other airports, he muttered. Same anomaly, all within the past 6 months. Toy devices, pediatric tools, even a heart monitor patch on a toddler flagged in Sarenport. Zaven's hands tightened around the edge of the table. Dismissed as handler error? Every time, no pattern declared, no probe launched. Bram placed a stack of internal memo screenshots on the table, files Zaven hadn't seen yet. "I collected these over the last year. I didn't connect the dots until now. Someone's running coordinated chaos simulations. They plant just enough doubt to call it a glitch, measure how fast it spreads, who reports it, who doesn't." Strategic chaos testing, Zaven muttered, voice bitter. "Use infants, medical devices, anything that won't scream protocol violation unless someone knows what to look for." Bram nodded. "And if someone like you catches it, it becomes a problem. Not because of what happened, but because of what you might do with it." Zaven walked to the window, staring out at the early morning haze over the city skyline. The air outside looked calm. Deceptively so. "They want silence," he said finally. "They want the story to rot in uncertainty." "But it won't," Bram warned, "if you go public." Zaven turned. "I am going public." Bram hesitated. "They may come after your family." Zaven looked past him toward the couch. Kieran had fallen asleep again, this time clutching a plush bear, the new Rattle beside it, blinking faintly with a built-in lullaby light. "They already did," Zaven said. He moved quickly now, knowing that hesitation was risk. He organized the surveillance footage from the airport, the medical tampering logs from Dr. Vess, the altered clearance documents from Wren, and Bram's compiled pattern reports. He encrypted them, time-stamped everything, and uploaded it to a secure whistleblower node used by aviation ethics analysts and federal investigators. But before he clicked "Send," he paused. Then he added one final line, typed with the same hand that still bore faint bandage lines from the bite. "The infant's Rattle was still in my hand when the dog tore through me. That's not training error, that's sabotage." The story exploded the very next morning, hitting the airwaves with the force of a national alarm. News anchors spoke in clipped, urgent tones as they replayed the now viral footage, pausing at the most horrifying moment, the instant the K-9 lunged while the infant carrier remained strapped to Zaven's chest. The broadcasts repeated the same line again and again, each time with growing disbelief. The infant's rattle was still in his hand. It became the phrase that gripped the country, a symbol of something that had gone terribly wrong in a place meant to keep families safe. Reporters interviewed travelers who had witnessed the attack firsthand, their shaken voices echoing through studios and living rooms. One man said, "I thought the dog had gone wild," while another whispered, "No, it looked trained." The contrast between confusion and outrage fed the national firestorm, and by midday, the entire nation was demanding answers. Inside a private conference room at the Oversight Wing, Zaven and Captain Ren Davor sat side by side, watching the coverage unfold on a wall-mounted screen. The tension in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. Every headline framed the incident as a moral and ethical catastrophe. Airline spokesmen issued vague statements about protocol misalignment, but they offered no real explanation. Former airport handlers began contacting networks anonymously, adding weight to Zaven's claims. One stated, "Dogs don't behave that way unless they were trained to respond to something we don't teach them." Another warned, "Someone changed the rules without telling the rest of us." Their voices blended into a chorus of concern, fueling the rising storm. But the true shift began when Ren's secure line pinged with a message. "He's here," Ren murmured, glancing at Zaven. Before either could respond, the conference room door opened and a man stepped inside. Officer Theron Mall, broad-shouldered, pale with stress, and wearing a K-9 division badge he had covered partially with his palm. He closed the door behind him slowly, as if weighing the risk of every small action. For a brief second, the room fell completely silent, the hum of electronics the only sound. Theron swallowed hard before speaking. "I'm here, because the truth isn't going to come out unless someone says it plainly." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of what he was carrying. Ren leaned back, eyes narrowing. Zaven straightened in his seat, feeling his heartbeat quicken. Theron continued, choosing each word with painful precision. Certain K-9 units weren't trained to respond to scent. They were trained to respond to encrypted signals, signal codes, not smells. His confession hung in the air like a dropped stone. Zaven leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. What encrypted signals? Theron looked down for a moment as though ashamed. They called it Farsign, an experimental program. They said it was for national defense, for situations where dogs needed to respond faster than human instruction. He paused, voice tightening. But that's not how it was used. Not fully. Ren's breath caught in his throat. "Explain." Theron rubbed the bridge of his nose before continuing. "It started with equipment tests, harmless objects at first. But then we started getting families, random families, usually with medical tags, toys, pediatric devices." The horror in his eyes was unmistakable, as if the memories themselves pained him more than revealing them. Zaven's jaw clenched. He placed a hand on his stitched side, the ache returning at the memory of the attack. "How many families?" he asked quietly. Theron hesitated, his shoulders slumped. "3 incidents before yours, all swept under silence, reports sealed, officers reassigned, victims told it was a mistake." He lifted his gaze slowly, meeting Zaven's stare. "You're the 4th. The room felt smaller now, as if the truth itself had constricted the air. Ren stood abruptly, pacing, one hand on his hip, the other pressed against his forehead. "This was never in any authorized protocol. Someone bypassed us. Someone used our division for covert testing." Zaven pushed himself to his feet, steadying his stance as the wound tugged at his side. His voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like steel. And they used a baby as bait. He looked over to the small carrier placed near the wall, Kieran sitting inside it now, babbling softly, holding the bright red rattle once again. The innocence of the moment contrasted sharply with the weight of everything happening around them. Ren turned to Theron. "Why come forward now?" Theron exhaled shakily. "Because the footage went public. Because they can't bury this one. And because I couldn't watch another family be used like that." He paused. "I thought I was serving something important. But this isn't defense. It's exploitation." Zaven walked toward Kieran, lifting the infant gently into his arms. The baby giggled, tapping the rattle against Zaven's shoulder, unaware of the danger he had been thrust into. The soft sound of the rattle echoed faintly through the room. Zaven looked back at Theron, then Ren. His voice was steady, but behind it was a storm. "Then I'll make sure the world sees everything." He stepped closer, his expression resolute. "Because now the entire world is watching." He glanced down at Kieran, who stared at him with wide, trusting eyes, the red rattle still gripped tightly in his small hand, and with a calm that contrasted sharply with the fury rising inside him, Zaven said the words that marked the turning point of the entire investigation. "And they picked the wrong uncle to test." A week later, Zaven Merrick stood beneath the blinding white dome lights of the Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Ethics. His legs were tense but locked steady, one hand resting on the now empty infant carrier slung across the oak podium, an unspoken symbol of the day everything changed. He didn't waste time introducing himself. He simply looked around the hearing chamber, eyes sweeping over the semicircle of senators, the wall of press cameras, the small gallery of officials from national security and aviation oversight, and, finally, toward the section where Kieran sat safely in a padded seat under light security watch, surrounded by silence more powerful than noise. He was calm, but every breath in Zaven's chest felt like it had to be earned. "I was holding a baby," he began, voice level but resolute. "That should have been enough to exempt me from any protocol, let alone one engineered with sabotage in mind." A hush fell across the marble-paneled room. No rustling of papers, no clacking of pens. Even the air handlers above seemed to dim their hum. Behind Zaven, a large screen displayed a still image of the Valor Airport terminal. Then, with a nod, he cued the playback. The footage rolled, Zaven passing through security, Kieran strapped to his chest, the red rattle gleaming against the baby's chest like a beacon. The dog appeared next. Black, lean, trained. The moment Bran Teller's phone lit up. Then, "Pause it," Zaven said sharply. The image froze at the exact instant the dog lunged. A collective inhale followed. "Look carefully," he continued. He moved to the screen and gestured with a laser pointer. "You'll see the rattle. And you'll see the leash wasn't reacting to a bark or sniff. It was responding to a text." Gasps weren't permitted in formal hearings, but disbelief leaked through anyway, in darting glances, in shifting postures, in the grip of pens held too tightly by congressional aides. The chairman, Senator Gralin Voss, leaned back slowly in his tall leather chair, fingers steepled as he stared at the frozen frame. "Officer Gerald Knorr, step forward," Voss said after a moment. Gerald walked stiffly to the front, nodding once to Zaven before taking the adjacent witness chair. He had shed his uniform for a plain suit, but his badge hung in a transparent pouch over his chest like a statement of conscience. His voice was quiet but clear. "I saw the hesitation," Jarrell said. "I saw Officer Teller act without warning, and I've never seen a K-9 unit behave like that unless it's been conditioned for one thing, a direct kill signal." Silence again, but this time it was volatile. Zaven studied the senators' faces. Some looked stunned. Some looked skeptical. But a few, especially those with visible security or military backgrounds, had begun to connect dots. Slowly, reluctantly. The chairman leaned forward, hands now flat against the table. Mr. Merrick, based on what we've seen, I believe there's cause to initiate a full federal inquiry into the Farsign K9 initiative. The name landed like a dropped gavel. Farsign, a program that hadn't been mentioned yet in the chamber, but now had a name aloud, and with a name, it had weight. Zaven didn't blink. "You'll need more than an inquiry, Senator," he said, stepping closer to the mic, eyes locked on Voss. "You'll need safeguards." "And why is that, Mr. Merrick?" the chairman asked carefully. Zaven's jaw tightened. He took a moment not to collect his thoughts but to force himself not to raise his voice. "Not here. Not yet." "Because next time," he said, his voice low but clear, "the baby might not be spared." There was a pause, a breath too long for comfort, and then he added, gaze sweeping the room one final time. "And the rattle might fall from a cold hand instead." The announcement came like a tremor through the country. All K9 tactical units were suspended pending federal review. The decision hit the airwaves only minutes after the footage of Kieran's attack reached its peak of national outrage. Crowds paused in terminals, living rooms, and office break rooms as the headlines scrolled across every screen. But for Zaven Merrick, standing in the dim light of Guardline's temporary operations hub, the moment felt less like victory and more like the beginning of another responsibility he had never asked for. He stared at the wall of incoming reports, hundreds of them, each submitted by families who had experienced false alerts or sudden reclassification during travel. The sheer volume made the room feel smaller, the air heavier. Zaven rubbed a hand over his face, trying to steady the mix of anger and purpose twisting in his chest. "This wasn't a one-time incident," he said quietly, almost to himself. Bram Veller, leaning over a table cluttered with signal analyzers, nodded without looking up. "No. And now people are finally saying it out loud." Dr. Laren Vess approached with a tablet in hand, his brow set in deep concentration. "The patterns match what we suspected. Tampering wasn't isolated. It was widespread." His voice held a controlled urgency, the tone of a man who had spent years decoding crises before they erupted. Zaven took the tablet, scanning a report where a child's pacifier had triggered a tactical response last month. Another documented an infant monitor suddenly being flagged as potential interference hardware. Dramatic irony settled over him. Families had been warning the system for months, but it had taken the image of a bleeding guardian and a crying baby to finally make the world listen. As the three men worked, the door opened quietly. Ren Davor stepped in, no longer wearing his airport insignia. Instead, his new badge read, Director of Ethical Compliance, Guardline. The resignation from his former position had not been a retreat. It was a pivot, one driven by guilt, duty, and a desire to fix what he had unknowingly been part of. "More submissions," he said, placing a stack of printed statements on the table. His voice was steady, but his shoulders carried the weight of someone who had seen how quickly systems could turn against the people they were meant to protect. The reforms came fast. Triple clearance verification for canine deployment around infants. Mandatory audit trails for every tactical signal received. New oversight rules that finally held commanders accountable for unexplained alerts. Yet, even as progress surged, there were shadows still moving beneath it all. One morning, news broke that Officer Brand Teller had vanished from his residence. Wren was the first to speak. "He won't get far," he murmured, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Hours later, confirmation arrived. Bran had been intercepted at a border checkpoint, carrying only a burner phone and a single duffel bag. He was brought into custody, pale, sweating, and defeated. The interrogation room was cold, metal, and unforgiving, yet it was Bran who looked the most fragile. When investigators asked whether he understood the severity of what he had done, he let out a low, shaky exhale. "We didn't think the kid would get hurt. It was just a signal test." His fingers trembled as he spoke, each word revealing more than he intended. When they pressed further, Why Zaven? Why a man holding an infant? Bran hesitated, eyes darting like he was searching for a safer truth. He wasn't on a list, he whispered. He was just convenient. The word sliced through the air like a blade. Later that evening, when reporters swarmed Zaven outside the guard-line building, cameras flashing under the dull glow of streetlights, he paused before speaking. His expression was calm, but there was fire behind his eyes. "No child should ever be convenient for harm," he said, his voice carrying across microphones and hushed crowds, "and no uncle should have to bleed to prove that." The envelope arrived without fanfare, slipped under Zaven Merrick's door sometime before dawn. It bore no return address, just an embossed seal in deep blue, National Safety Commission. Zaven stared at it for a moment, still half-dressed from his early morning routine with Kieran, who sat on the living room floor babbling at a plush giraffe. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. He broke the seal. Inside was a formal letter, an invitation to speak at the Commission's annual Ethics Symposium at Verdun Hall. "You have been selected," it read, "to present a keynote on the implications of emergent surveillance ethics and pediatric vulnerability within operational security zones." Beneath the elegant typeface was a signature in black ink, Director Halvin Corin. Zaven let the paper lower to his side. His chest tightened. He had testified before senators, confronted officers, survived cross-examination and public exposure. But this was different. Verdun Hall wasn't about emotion or tragedy. It was about policy, blueprints, cold change. He looked at Kieran, now trying to crawl toward the bookshelf. The boy didn't know the weight of that envelope, or what it meant to stand in front of people who wrote laws for machines. Zaven exhaled slowly. "All right," he said aloud, voice almost steady. "We'll give them something to remember." Verdun Hall rose like a glass citadel on the edge of the city, its sweeping curves designed to evoke transparency, its security so layered that attendees passed through 6 scans before entering the main rotunda. Zaven adjusted his tie in the reflective paneling of the hallway as a young aide guided him to the stage's preparation room. His nerves didn't show, but they coiled silently beneath his skin. In the green room, a large monitor displayed a real-time feed of the audience. Over 2,000 attendees, officials, technologists, watchdog delegates, and press filled the stadium-seated hall. A single banner draped above the main stage. "Security must serve, not harm." A soft chime sounded. "You're on in 1 minute, Mr. Merrick," the coordinator said, checking a clipboard. Zaven nodded. He straightened his jacket, then glanced down at the polished wooden case that held his speech notes and one other object, Kieran's new Rattle. He'd brought it not as a prop, but as a reminder. Smooth, signal-safe, harmless. As he stepped into the spotlight, the hall dimmed. The audience quieted. He didn't start with facts. He started with a memory. "I was holding a baby." His voice echoed, clear and low. "And I was bleeding." He let the silence sit. No images yet, just the words. "I've trained soldiers, treated crash victims, stabilized trauma in war zones and beneath rubble, but I've never felt fear like I did that day at Gate 19. Not for myself, for the life attached to my chest." He tapped the screen behind him. A still image appeared. The surveillance shot of him shielding Kieran, the black K9 mid-lunge, the infant Rattle just slipping from his grip. "What you see here isn't a security failure. It's a blueprint warning. This is what happens when protocol outpaces conscience, when our systems are built to react to signals, but not context." Zaven paced slowly across the stage, each step deliberate. You cannot teach a dog to understand empathy, but you can teach a system to pause. You can build safeguards that say, a child is present. Reassess. You can require human review before force is triggered, but only if you choose to. Now came the data. He presented the whistleblower's admissions, the intercepted messages, the synthetic triggers, the loophole that allowed a child's toy to be weaponized through frequency masking. Heads in the crowd lowered, eyes narrowed. Then came the live footage, muted, but playing silently behind him. The moment Bran Teller's dog lunged. The blood, the panic, the rattle hitting the ground. Zaven turned and spoke to it, not the crowd. "You didn't ask who we were. You only asked what we were carrying." He turned back to the audience. "And that's what nearly cost a baby his life." There was a long silence, then applause. It wasn't loud, but it was sustained. After the session, Zaven stepped off stage, drained but composed. As attendees dispersed into breakout rooms, he remained near the stairwell, eyes closed for a moment, forehead against the cool glass. He had said what needed to be said. "Mr. Merrick?" He turned. A man in a gray uniform stood before him. Older, with streaks of white in his hair and a badge that bore 3 stars. He said nothing at first, just reached into a slim case and pulled out a soft bundle wrapped in the velvet cloth. "We found this in off-site evidence storage. Tag ID matched the day of the incident. It's yours." Zaven carefully unfolded the cloth. Inside was the original red rattle. The bite marks were still there, faint, but real. The plastic was scuffed. A small crack near the base had been sealed with forensic tape. Zaven held it in both hands. "You should keep it," the man said softly. Zaven nodded, eyes locked on the rattle. He could still hear the cries, still feel the weight of Kieran's carrier digging into his shoulder, still see the moment the dog's jaws opened and the world narrowed to survival. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Let it stay that way," he whispered, "as proof that silence can bleed, and truth must roar." Fully immersive narrative, minimum 2,000 characters matching the exact final line as requested. The sound of soft footsteps echoed beneath the marble arches of Valor International Airport's newly built terminal wing. A year had passed since blood had stained the tiles near Gate 19, but the memory lingered like a watermark no polish could erase. Now, the space had transformed. Where once there was confusion and screams, now stood the Merrick Ethics Pavilion, a calm, sunlit atrium filled with quiet awe. Reporters clustered behind velvet ropes. Travelers paused mid-journey, some removing earbuds, others nudging children closer. The centerpiece stood under a skylight, a bronze sculpture of a hand cradling a baby's rattle. Its surface gleamed in the morning light, etched with shallow bite marks preserved in metal like scar tissue that refused to fade. A plaque beneath read, "He shielded a child and exposed the lie." Zaven Merrick adjusted the collar of his dark coat. The infant carrier was gone. Kieran had grown into a confident toddler now, but the weight he once bore still clung to his shoulders in memory. Beside him, Kieran giggled, wobbling forward with the unsteady grace of early independence. He reached up toward the statue, his small hand brushing the cold metal rattle. Zaven smiled and crouched, scooping the boy into his arms. "Curious, aren't you?" he whispered, pressing his forehead gently against Kieran's. The cameras clicked, but he barely noticed them. A man approached, suit tailored, voice measured. "Mr. Merrick, the press is ready." Zaven nodded once. He walked toward the podium placed just beneath the sculpture's shadow. His footsteps were steady, his jaw set, not with anger, but with something firmer. Resolve. Behind him, the rotunda held its breath. "I never wanted to become a symbol," Zaven began, his voice clear, unshaken. "And I never wanted my nephew's first memory of travel to involve stitches, flashing lights, and a dog trained to mistake a child's toy for a threat." He paused, scanning the crowd. Kieran sat in a secured seating area nearby, swinging his legs happily, completely unaware of the gravity unfolding around him. "But I did want one thing, to ensure no one else would have to hold a child in one hand and a wound in the other." He gestured toward the sculpture. "This isn't about art. It's a warning, a reminder, and a promise." A display screen flickered behind him, revealing key updates. Guardline, implemented in 12 countries, 4 more in active legislation, 327 confirmed cases reclassified under new ethical compliance codes, Merrick Infant Exemption Act ratified. The room broke into light applause, not of celebration, but of acknowledgement. A young journalist stood. "Mr. Merrick, do you believe this is enough?" Zaven turned slightly, eyes sharp. "Enough for what?" "To keep it from happening again." Zaven didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked back toward the sculpture, placed a hand on the bronze fingers frozen around the rattle, and stared at the marks left by a dog that had no idea it was part of an experiment. Then, finally, "This is a start, but memory fades. That's why we build reminders." More questions followed, but Zaven fielded them with composure, even grace. He thanked the senators who had supported the bill, acknowledged Ren Davor's new oversight role, and praised Bram Veller and Dr. Laren Vess for their forensic efforts. But he never let the focus drift far from the children, the infants who could not speak for themselves, the guardians who had once been told to follow orders. Eventually, the press briefing closed. Travelers began flowing around the atrium once more, snapping photos, whispering the story to companions unfamiliar with the event. The legacy had outlived the moment. As Zaven crouched once more to pick up Kieran, the boy looked toward the bronze sculpture again, this time with a laugh. He hugged his uncle's neck tightly. Zaven whispered, "We made it, little one." Then he straightened as another reporter pushed through the dispersing crowd. "Mr. Merrick, one last question," he called out. "How did you stay calm when the dog attacked?" Zaven paused. The boy's arms looped around his neck. His answer came slowly, but without hesitation. "Because I wasn't holding a weapon. I was holding my brother's son, and his rattle was still in my hand." Seconds later, the father's intervention neutralized the threat, protecting both uncle and infant, leaving the K9 and its handler stunned. The terminal froze as accountability struck instantly. If you believe real authority protects the innocent with speed, precision, and unstoppable force, subscribe now because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores unexpected danger, quick thinking, and the courage to protect loved ones under pressure. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage accountability, vigilance, and respect in high-stakes situations.